Scripture defines crunch time as a critical moment or period, like the end of a game, when decisive action is needed. Every sports fan knows this time in the game. Your palms sweat just a little more, your heart races just a little bit faster, and you live and die with every play until the final seconds tick off the clock and you're either celebrating a victory or disappointed by the defeat. The team at Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network understands just how critical these moments are. For us, it begins as soon as the next set of games are on the board. We evaluate the opening lines and any breaking news throughout the week. We cover each game inside and out, whether it's from inside the locker room to a huddle down on the field, the court, or the ice. We take you inside the meeting room with scouts, coaches, and executives. We have our fingers on the pulse of all the sports that we cover: the National Hockey League, NBA, college basketball, college football, and the National Football League. We are the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network, and we're here to help you find your sports advantage. After all the data has been crunched, we then turn it over to Kenneth for the best analysis around. His unique perspective in both understanding the data and how it applies to the game and how you win is the Crunch Time Sports Advantage. Are you ready? The Crunch Time Jet is fueled and ready for takeoff, and the Crunch Time Express is about to leave the station. Your VIP pass has been approved, so all aboard.
Welcome to the 2024 College Football Team Autopsy Report. An autopsy report is a document that summarizes the findings of an autopsy, an examination of a body after death. It includes details of the examination, tests, and observations performed, as well as the cause and manner of death. Just like a real autopsy report, the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network College Football Autopsy Report examines a team's body of work after the season has concluded. This report includes a review of the team's season win total and whether they met expectations, key offensive, defensive, and special teams metrics that shaped the season, a deep dive into coaching decisions, including situational play and fourth down aggressiveness, a final season grade, evaluating execution, performance in key moments, and consistency, the final verdict, analyzing what went right, what went wrong, and what must be fixed for 2025. With the 2024 season in the rearview mirror, it's time to examine the patient. To present the findings, we have called in our Chief Medical Examiner and Senior Analyst, Kenneth.
And welcome into the Crunch Time Sports Advantage 2024 Team Autopsy Report. We're heading up to Bloomington, Indiana, and Coach Curt Cignetti, I don't have to Google you, baby. I already know who you are as a head coach. Let's not waste any time. I got you for the next 27 minutes, and we're going to talk 2024 Indiana Hoosiers, what we saw and what we're looking forward to see coming up in 2025. If you're tuning in on YouTube or our Twitter feed at Crunch Time VIP, I want to say thank you very much. If you're listening on your favorite podcast platform, thank you for joining us as well. Anything that I reference on the screen, don't worry, I got you covered. We talk about Curt Cignetti. This man can flat out coach, and if any athletic director was worth his salt, they would open up the Brinks truck and get this guy into a bigger time program because all he does is win. Shout out to DJ Khaled, by the way. Now, 3 years as a head coach, 30 wins, 6 losses. That's an 83% winning percentage there. Find me a lot of coaches that's got a better winning percentage than he does. I'll wait on that. 2 years at James Madison. All he did was go 19-4. His final year, oh, by the way, he just went 11-1 there. So he takes the job at Indiana, and all he does in his first year is go 11-1 in the regular season. That one loss, oh, by the way, the national champions, Ohio State. So let's take a look at the 2024 Indiana Hoosiers because we do have a lot to unpack. Let's start right there as we always like to do with that season win total. Folks, Back in June, the season win total was 5.5. I was absolutely all over this, telling our clients that if you wanted a ticket that was going to absolutely cash, taking Indiana over the 5.5 was about as good as you were going to ever get. They actually doubled their season win total. Now, if you want to know how spot on we were as far as their in-season total, I want you to take a listen to these numbers. Our composite win total, 3 very unique but very predictive statistical categories that we look at. We had the Indiana Hoosiers at a 10.8 win team last year during the regular season. Folks, you don't get much more spot on than that. But we're not here to pat ourselves on the back like Coach Belichick always taught us. We're on to Cincinnati. Now, let's talk about the schedule because that's very important to bring up in this conversation. Your strength of schedule and strength of record, two very unique but very different data points. Your strength of schedule. Now, when you play in a major conference, you only control about 20 to 25% of your schedule, your non-conference schedule. Your in-conference schedule is basically a random luck of the draw. Some years are going to be more difficult than others. Some years are going to play more difficult than others. So when we talk about strength of schedule for the Indiana Hoosiers, 26%, folks, that was 69th out of 134 teams. So you're talking about at the very bottom end of what a Power 4 schedule would have looked like. Now, their strength of record, 43%, 125th out of 132 teams. We're going to now examine why the strength of schedule is much higher than the strength of record. So let's walk through their opponent's win-loss record. We know FIU, Florida International, finished the regular season at 4-8. Western Illinois, a game that was not initially supposed to be on the schedule, but a last-minute flip where they bought their way out of a game last year and replaced that with Western Illinois, thinking that they would need to get a couple of easy wins to make that record look good. You can't fault them for it, but absolutely should have been penalized for it. Now, once we get in the conference, they opened up with UCLA, and then they played another out-of-conference team in Charlotte. Both of those teams went 5-7. Now we are firmly into Big Ten play here. Maryland was 4-8. Northwestern was 4-8. Nebraska was 6-6. Washington Huskies were 6-6. Michigan State was 5-7. Michigan was 7-5. Ohio State 10-2 in the regular season, and Purdue, one of the worst teams in college football last year, 1-11. So what that number is telling me is their opponents' power rankings were higher than what their opponent's actual win-loss record was. So that's why you see the big wide gap in those two numbers. Now, let's talk about how difficult or how tough were the defenses that this Indiana offense went up against last year. And we used that baseline of 68. So how many of their opponents were inside of that top 68? UCLA at the 50th power ranked defense for us last year. Nebraska was 14th. Washington was 43rd. Michigan State was 63rd. Michigan was 21st. And then Ohio State was our number one rated power ranked defense last year. So just 6 of their opponents were inside of that top 68. Now we got to give you the other side of that coin. 3 of their opponents were outside of the top 90. FIU was 98th, Charlotte 107th, and Purdue 117th. So not a lot of meat on that bone as far as high caliber defenses that they face. Just 3 of their opponents were inside of the top 25 last year. So let's talk about the offense and kind of measure up when we look at the data, the way we're going to walk through it here. We're going to give you, for the offense, we're going to give you the NCAA average for that category, what Indiana's accounting stats show, and that's basically what you look at any reference site. And then we're going to give you our adjusted number based on the opponent, what they would have had if they would have played that average schedule out based on opponents instead of what they actually played out for that category. And then for the defense, we're just going to give you their accounting stat number and then our adjusted number for that category. So let's start right there with the offense. Average team last year scored 28 points per game. Indiana was at 43.3 points per game. Now, when we adjust for opponent, does go down just a tick to 39.6, but still, that is an elite caliber offense when you're talking about an offense scoring nearly 40 points per game. Now, passing yards per game. Average team last year, 227 yards per game passing. Indiana was at 265. However, when we adjust for opponent, it does go down to 250 yards per game passing. Still above the average, just a little bit of a tick down. Average team running the ball last year, 160 yards per game. The Hoosiers were at 174 yards per game. Slight adjustment up based on opponent, if we adjust for opponent, at 176 yards per game. Total offense, average team last year, 387 yards per game. The Hoosiers were at 439 yards per game, but just a little bit of a tick down when we adjust for opponent, 426 yards per game. Now, let's take a look at some advanced numbers here. The average team last year drives ending with a score, either a touchdown or a field goal, 40% of the time. Indiana was at a whopping 60% last year. Drives ending with a touchdown, so not just getting field goals, but drives ending with the band getting queued up 29% of the time. Indiana was at 51%. Literally, 1 out of every 2 drives for Indiana last year went for a touchdown. And then third down conversion, something that we love here at the Crunch Time Sports Advantage Network. 39% was the average last year. Indiana was at 44.3 when we adjust for opponents. So this team knew how to keep drives going, and that's how they put touchdowns on the board. Now, this team only gave up 21 sacks in the games that we tracked last year. That's a little bit better than the average team last year, but here's the most impressive number about Indiana offense last year. Only 8 turnovers. That is how you win ball games in college football, high school football, or the NFL. Now, let's take one final step with their offense. We'll talk about our 3 E's. How effective, how efficient, and how explosive was your offense last year? This was the number 3 ranked offense in effectiveness last year, number 11 as far as explosive offense, and number 4 in efficiency. When we look at the 2024 Indiana Hoosiers, they were our number 4 ranked offense in college football last year. And they were led by the young man that we dubbed America's quarterback for America's team last year, Curtis Rourke. In 12 games last year, 222 completions, 320 attempts, 69% completion percentage there for 69% completion percentage for 3,042 yards, 29 passing touchdowns, just 5 interceptions. You're talking about a guy who wasn't just dinking and dunking either. 9.5 yards per attempt. Folks, that's better than what Jalen Daniels had the year that he won the Heisman. 13.7 yards per completion. Oh, yeah, a lot of big plays in that offense last year. Now, let's talk about the defense here. And if we can flip that to the next screen here, perfectly. Okay, now let's talk about what kind of caliber offenses did Indiana's defense go up against last year? Again, we'll use that baseline number of 68. Maryland was 60th. Nebraska barely makes the cut line from an offensive standpoint at 67. The only other opponent that they faced inside of the top 68 was Ohio State, who was power ranked 8th. 3 of the offenses that they faced last year were inside of the top 68. Here's the even worse part of that number. Outside of the top 100, they faced 5 offenses last year that were outside of the top 100. Florida International was 114th, Charlotte 102, Northwestern 101, Michigan State 103, and Purdue 108. This defense was not challenged at all last year. You're talking about an average power ranking of 82. This kind of offense would have probably been on a 4-win team. So when we grade out their defense, you're going to hear me give you the numbers here, and you're probably going to hear me give some adjusted numbers that has some real swing to it. So average point per game allowed, 14.7. When we adjust for opponent, 18.7. That is still phenomenal defense, even when you adjust that for opponent. Now, passing yardage allowed, 174, identical to what we have when we adjust for opponent. When we look at the rush defense, here's where the adjustment gets made. If you look at their raw numbers, they gave up 71 yards per game rushing. However, when we adjust that for opponent, not a horrible swing, but does go up to 115 yards per game. So a 44-yard swing there towards the negative. Still far below the NCAA average, but we have to point out that differential there. And as far as total offense, on the raw counting stats number, 245 yards per game. When we adjust that for opponent, 288 yards per game. Again, a 43-yard per game differential there towards the negative. Now, their opponents, drives ending with a score, touchdown or field goal, 28%. Phenomenal. Their opponents did a better job of converting on their drives ending with touchdowns, 21%. You would expect there to be a much bigger gap between those two numbers. And then their opponents converting on third downs, adjusted 33%. Still better than the NCAA average, but you would expect that number to be a little bit lower considering the caliber of teams that they faced last year. Did a good job of getting after the opponent's quarterbacks, 29 sacks. Their opponents did not convert on fourth downs, 10 out of 32. Talking about 31%. That's almost 20 percentage points better than the average. And then did a great job of forcing turnovers, 23 turnovers there. Now let's talk about their 3 E's on defense. 4th best defense as far as effectiveness goes. 6th best in allowing explosive plays, and 15th in efficiency. This Indiana Hoosier defense finished as our 7th best defense in college football last year. So you're talking about a team, despite all the adjustments that we made, still had a top 10 offense and a top 10 defense. That's how you make the college football playoffs, folks. If I had to bullet point the offense and defense in a single capsule, the offense was elite and explosive. The defense was stifling, but schedule dependent. I can agree with that because we did have to do some adjustments to the run defense there, but still high caliber defense. Let's get to the special teams before we talk about the coach, Kirk Cignetti, and how he coached in situational play last year. 10 out of 11 field goal attempts, 91%, phenomenal. When you're looking at a team from a punting standpoint, good job there. 3.3 punts per game, 44.2 average per punt. That is very good. So this unit was both reliable and efficient there in the special teams. You got to love that there. Now, when we look at the turnover differential, folks, plus 15 in the turnover differential. That's a top 10 turnover differential there for your team, and only committed 5 penalties per game for 45 yards there. Well coached, fundamentally sound. That is winning football at any level, at any program. Now, we talked about Curt Cignetti. In one-score games last year, folks, this team was in just one-score game last year. And they won that ball game there, beating Michigan 20-15. As far as their games against quality opponents, faced 4 quality opponents last year, 3-1. That one loss coming to Ohio State. And then as far as how aggressive was Coach Cignetti going for it on fourth down, 16.5%. That would put him at 29th out of 144 qualifying head coaches last year with a conversion rate of 60%, 12 out of 20. I would agree with that aggressive nature based on their conversion rate. In our final 7 or 8 minutes, I'm going to walk you through their offensive and defensive splits as far as in the games that they won and, of course, the games that they lost. So in their 11 victories, and that one loss will also include the playoff game there as well. So in those 11 wins last year, this team was cranking out 46 points per game, 283 yards per game passing on 28 attempts, 10.1 yards per attempt, 14.3 yards per completion. Folks, when I tell you that is video game numbers, that's exactly what I mean by that. Their run game was also elite. 39 rushing attempts per game, 182 yards per game rushing, 4.7 yards per play. 4.7 yards per rushing attempt. When I look at their yards per play, 7 yards per play, about 67 plays per game in those wins, 465 yards per game. That's why that number just jumped out, 7 yards per play. Folks, every 2 plays, this team was averaging a first down. That is phenomenal. And then we talked about it, averaging 6 touchdowns per game in those victories, 47% on third downs, 59% on fourth downs, committed just 7 turnovers in those 11 victories. In the 2 losses, 16 points per game. The passing yards basically cut in half, 142 yards per game passing on 26 attempts. Also cut in half the yards per passing attempt, 5.4 yards per attempt, 10.1 yards per completion. The ground game also suffered 34 rushing attempts in those 2 games for just 73 yards per game rushing, 2.1 yards per rushing attempt. Starting to pick up a theme here when they stepped up in weight class on the opponent side. The numbers for the offense absolutely suffered. 60 plays per game, just 215 yards per game in total offense, 3.6 yards per play. The third down conversion, 43% and 50% on fourth downs. Did just commit just 1 turnover in those 2 losses. But we talked about it. The offensive and efficiency in those 2 big-time matchups there really suffered there. Let's see if we see the same kind of swing in their defense as we saw in their offense. Absolutely. In 11 wins, just 12.5 points per game. Opponents, passing attempts, 31 per game. Passing yardage, 172 yards per game passing. 5.6 yards per attempt, 9.3 yards per completion. We're not giving up big chunk plays when they won. Their opponents running the ball 29 times per game for just 67 yards per game. 2.3 yards per rushing attempt, 60 plays per game, 238 yards per game in total offense, 4 yards per play. Their opponents converting on third downs, 32%, 28% on fourth downs, 22 turnovers. Now, in those losses, 33 points per game, 201 yards per game passing, so not a big difference there, about 30 yards on 29 attempts, 6.9 yards per attempt, 8.9 yards per completion. So not horrible there as far as the pass defense. The rush defense, we do see a major swing. 32 rushing attempts per game, 154 yards per game allowed, 4.8 yards per rushing attempt. Again, not horrible, but just a big enough swing there. Their opponent, 61 plays per game in those two losses, but 355 yards per game in total offense. So you're talking about an additional 117 yards per game is what this defense was giving up in those two losses, 5.8 yards per play. Their opponents on third downs were converting 36%, but 67% on fourth downs, and just forced one turnover in those two matchups. So we saw the big swing there. Folks, let's go ahead and get to the final grade, because you can imagine with some of these numbers where the Indiana Hoosiers final grade may have ended up. And the Indiana Hoosiers will get a final grade of an A-. Why? Indiana was an elite statistical team, but their weak schedule did make it hard to determine how good they truly were. Indiana showed flashes of competitiveness, but struggled with offensive consistency and defensive breakdowns when they stepped up in weight class. I'm referring to that game against Ohio State and, of course, the college football playoff matchup. The Hoosiers' inability to sustain drives and protect their quarterback and generate takeaways put them at a disadvantage in both that regular season matchup against Ohio State and in the college football playoffs. While they fought hard in several games, their lack of execution on third downs and red zone efficiency cost them from advancing deeper into the college football playoffs. So, in our final minute and a half here, let me give you 3 very important keys for the Indiana Hoosiers in 2025. Establish more of a consistent offensive identity, especially when you're stepping up in weight class. Key number 2, improve the pass protection and offensive line play. We know that the schedule in 2025 is going to look a little bit different, and teams are going to be a little bit more focused and prepared when playing Indiana this year. So where does it always start for me when I'm looking at a team? It's the offense and defensive line play. And speaking of defense, got to find some more defensive playmakers that can continuously force turnovers and negative plays. Not just showing up in the wins. I talked about their defense in their losses, only 1 forced turnover. You got to be able to flip the ball back into your team's possession and try to put points on the board without having to drive the length of the field. If the Indiana Hoosiers can improve in these areas, not only will this team be eligible again for a bowl appearance this year, could find their way back into the college football playoffs in 2025.
Thank you for tuning into this podcast. We hope you enjoyed today's episode and our deep dive into all things college football. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the show on your favorite podcast platform. And if you're watching on YouTube, be sure to like this video and hit that subscribe button. You can follow us on Twitter at CrunchTimeVIP for updates, insights, and more content. And make sure to visit our website at CrunchTimeSportsAdvantage.com for in-depth blogs, game previews, and information about our Crunch Time Express handicapping packages. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time for our next patient on the 2024 College Football Autopsy Report.